The grand chamber of the High Synod was not merely a room. It was a cavernous expanse of acoustically perfect obsidian, designed to amplify the whispers of the powerful and swallow the pleas of the weak. Here, beneath the vaulted ceiling that mimicked the swirling nebulas of the core worlds, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and the heavy, oppressive gravity of political stagnation. High Adjudicator Thrax, a being of chitin and bioluminescent veins, rested his heavy claws upon the podium, the vibrations of his frustration rippling through the sensory organs of the assembled delegates. For cycles beyond counting, the Synod had maintained the equilibrium of the galaxy, enforcing the immutable laws of engineering, a sacred set of physics and economic constraints that dictated what could exist and what was merely the fevered dream of madmen. And yet the humans, that young, upstart species from the Spiral Arm's desolate edge, had submitted a proposal so flagrantly impossible, so structurally arrogant, that Thrax felt the very concept was an insult to the memory of the precursors. They proposed to build a structure not around a star, nor upon a planet, but within the Synod's silence, the treacherous, physics-defying void between the galactic clusters where the fabric of reality thinned and entropy howled like a living beast. It was a region of space where fleets disappeared, where shielding failed, and where the crushing pressure of nothingness turned dreadnoughts into dust. No one built there. No one could build there. To attempt it was suicide, to propose it was heresy. Thrax looked out over the sea of faces, avian, reptilian, amorphous, and cybernetic, and saw the reflection of his own disdain. The holographic projection in the center of the room displayed the human schematic. It was a ring, vast beyond comprehension, suspended in the absolute dark, tethered to nothing, powered by the very shearing forces that should have destroyed it. The sheer scale of it mocked the Synod's greatest achievements. "They call it the anchor," Thrax rumbled, his voice a low bass thrum that resonated in the chest cavities of the oxygen breathers. "They claim it will stabilize the localized reality flux. They claim it will allow for habitation in the deep void. But we know the truth. The mathematics of the great filter are absolute. The stress tensors alone would require materials that do not exist in this universe, forged in temperatures that would burn out a hypergiant star. This is not engineering, this is fantasy. It is the plea of a species terrified of its own irrelevance, seeking to leave a mark before they inevitably flicker out." A murmur of assent rippled through the hall, a cacophony of chirps, deep groans, and digital signals. The High Synod had seen thousands of species rise and fall, many destroyed by their own hubris. The humans were merely the latest in a long line of tragedy. They were fragile, soft-skinned, lacking the natural armor or the psionic capabilities of the elder races. They were viewed with a mix of pity and annoyance. Industrious, yes, but fundamentally limited by their biology and their naive optimism. The doors to the grand chamber did not open with fanfare. There was no blare of trumpets, no announcement of arrival. Instead, the heavy silence was broken only by the rhythmic, solitary click of boots on the obsidian floor. The human delegation was small, comprised of only 3 individuals, dwarfed by the towering architecture and the immense alien forms surrounding them. Leading them was Ambassador Elias Thorne, a man of advanced years, his hair the color of iron, his face etched with the lines of stress and sorrow that seemed characteristic of his species. He wore no armor, no ceremonial robes of silk and light, only a simple dark tunic that seemed to absorb the ambient glow of the chamber. He walked with a calm that bordered on apathy, ignoring the hundreds of eyes that bored into him, ignoring the palpable wave of hostility that washed down from the raised dais. He stopped at the center of the room beneath the shimmering, mocking hologram of his people's impossible dream. He did not bow. He did not plead. He simply waited, his hands clasped behind his back, looking up at Thrax with eyes that seemed to hold the cold vacuum of the void itself. The contrast was stark. The massive, chitinous adjudicator, surrounded by the wealth of 1,000 worlds, and the small, frail human, standing in the center of a court that had already condemned him. "You have heard the judgment of the Engineering Directorate," Thrax said, his voice booming. "Your request for resource allocation is denied. Your request for navigational permits into the Synod's silence is denied. Furthermore, the Synod hereby issues a writ of prohibition. You are forbidden from wasting further galactic assets on this folly. The void between galaxies is a graveyard, Ambassador Thorne. We will not allow you to add your civilization to its. Bone pile, return to your worlds, tend to your gardens, accept your limits." The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. The aliens waited for the outburst, the denial, the emotional pleading that usually accompanied such rejections. They expected the humans to rage against the dying of the light, but Thorne did not rage. He did not even blink. He slowly unclasped his hands and tapped a small device on his wrist. The hologram above them flickered. The schematic of the ring vanished, replaced by a live sensor feed. It was a view of the Sen's silence, that terrifying abyss of non-space, but it was not empty. "We did not come to ask for permission, High Adjudicator," Thorne said, his voice soft, yet carrying to the furthest reaches of the hall with a strange, dampened acoustic clarity. "We came to issue an invitation." On the screen, amidst the swirling chaos of dark matter and entropic shear, a light pulsed. It was steady, rhythmic, a heartbeat in the grave of the universe. "The structure is already complete. We finished it 3 standard cycles ago. We have been living there. We have been waiting. And now we are ready to show you why." A shockwave of disbelief hit the chamber. It was physical, a collective gasp that sucked the air from the room. Sensors flared to life on 100 different consoles as delegates scrambled to verify the feed. Impossible. The readings had to be faked. No matter could withstand the tidal forces of that region. The energy requirements to stabilize a construction platform alone would drain a sector dry. And yet the image remained, a silver thread woven into the darkness, defiant, impossible, real. Thrax gripped the podium, his chitin cracking under the pressure of his own grip. "You lie," he hissed, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "You speak of impossibilities. If you have sent ships there, they are dead hulks floating in the drift." "Then come and see," Thorne replied, his expression unchanging. "The UNS Daedalus is in orbit. We will transport a delegation of your finest skeptics, your greatest engineers, your loudest critics. Come to the silence. If we are dead, you can reclaim the resources. If we are lying, you can execute us for deception. But if we are right, then everything you know about the physics of this galaxy is about to change." The challenge hung in the air, absolute and unavoidable. To refuse was to show fear. To accept was to acknowledge the possibility that the Synod, the ancient, wise, all-knowing Synod, had been wrong. Thrax looked at the human, searching for deceit, for madness. He found only a terrifying, placid confidence. A confidence that suggested the humans knew something the elder races did not. A confidence that suggested the hierarchy of the galaxy had already shifted, and the Synod was simply the last to know. The journey to the edge of the galactic disk was long, a voyage that strained the patience and the nerves of the alien delegation. The human ship, the Daedalus, was a marvel of utilitarian brutality. It lacked the elegant curves and bioorganic aesthetics of the Synod's fleet. It was a block of gray composite, scarred by micrometeoroids, humming with the deep, unsettling vibration of a singularity reactor. Another technology the Synod had deemed too dangerous to pursue. Thrax and his entourage of scientists and diplomats found the human vessel cramped, cold, and disturbingly quiet. The human crew moved with a synchronized efficiency that was almost robotic, speaking in clipped tones, their eyes focused on their tasks with an intensity that bordered on religious devotion. There was no art on the walls, no music in the mess halls. It was a vessel of war, or perhaps a vessel of penance. As they crossed the final threshold, leaving the comfort of the star-rich spiral arms behind, the viewports looked out onto the encroaching nothingness. The Sen's silence was a region where the background radiation of the universe dropped to near absolute zero, a pocket of space where the expansion of the universe had stretched reality so thin that the laws of probability began to fray. Deep introspection plagued the alien delegates as the stars behind them faded into a distant ribbon of light. They began to feel the psychological weight of the void. The Synod species were creatures of light and gravity. They thrived in the bustle of dense clusters. Here in the dark, they felt small. They felt the crushing weight of their own mortality. High Scholar Xylo, a gelatinous being floating in a pressurized tank, communicated his distress through the translation matrix. "The readings are chaotic," Xylo's synthesized voice whispered. "The dark energy density here should be tearing this ship apart. The hull integrity is holding, but the math does not make sense. The humans are dampening the vacuum energy. How? To do so would require a power source equivalent to a captured star, yet their reactor output is nominal." Thrax stood by the viewport, staring into the abyss. He felt a primal fear, an instinctual urge to turn back, to flee to the safety of the warmth. He looked at Captain Thorne, who stood on the bridge, hands clasped, watching the darkness as if it were an old friend. "Why here?" Thrax asked, his voice losing its booming resonance, reduced to a rasp. "Why build in the place where the universe goes to die? What madness drove you to this?" Thorne turned, and for the first time a flicker of emotion crossed his face, not pride, but a deep, melancholy longing. "We didn't build it because we wanted to conquer the void, High Adjudicator. We built it because it was the only place quiet enough." The answer was cryptic, frustratingly human. Before Thrax could demand clarification, the Daedalus began to decelerate. The hum of the engines changed pitch, dropping to a sub-bass rumble that rattled the teeth. "Look," Thorne said, gesturing to the main screen. The darkness ahead seemed to ripple. It was not a visual distortion, but a gravitational one. The light from the distant galaxies behind them was bending, lensing around an invisible sphere of influence. And then, as the ship pushed through the distortion field, the structure revealed itself. It was not merely a ring. It was a lattice of silver light, a delicate, intricate web of metal and energy that spanned millions of kilometers. It glowed with a soft, blue luminescence, a beacon in the eternal night. It did not fight the chaotic forces of the Sen's silence. It rode them. The structure undulated like a living thing, its segments shifting and rotating to disperse the shearing forces of the dark energy. It was a masterpiece of dynamic architecture, a structure that breathed with the void rather than resisting it. At its center, suspension fields held a small artificial star, not a fusion reactor, but something else, a swirling vortex of white light that looked dangerously like a contained tear in space-time. The alien engineers on the bridge gasped. Tablets were dropped. Tentacles flailed in shock. The sensors went wild, screaming impossible readings. The structure was harvesting the entropy shear. It was taking the destructive force of the vacuum and converting it into stability. The humans hadn't just built a habitat. They had solved the equation of universal decay. They had turned the poison of the cosmos into fuel. "Welcome to Station Ethelgard," Thorne said. "The listening post." The Daedalus docked with the massive structure, the clamps locking with a thud that reverberated through the hull. The transition from the ship to the station was seamless. The airlock opened to reveal a grand concourse, not of gray steel, but of glass and light. Trees, real, living oaks and pines from Earth, lined the walkways, growing beneath the light of the artificial sun. The air smelled of rain and soil, a sharp contrast to the sterile, recycled air of the ship. Humans moved through the concourse, civilians, scientists, families. They did not look like people under siege by the universe. They looked at peace. Thrax walked in a daze, his claws clicking on the transparent floor that looked down into the infinite abyss below. He saw children playing near the edge of a force field that held back the crushing dark. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. To live here, on the edge of oblivion, and to plant gardens. It spoke of a psychological resilience that the Synod had completely underestimated. They were led to a central spire, a room that seemed to float in the center of the ring. The walls were pure transparency, offering a 360-degree view of the void. In the center of the room stood a massive console, manned by a dozen operators. They were not piloting the station. They were listening. Visualizations of sound waves, of frequency spikes, of data streams scrolled across the screens in a waterfall of information. "You asked why," Thorne said, standing before the console. "You asked why we came to the quietest place in the universe. It wasn't to hide. It was because we heard something. Back in the spiral arm, amidst the chatter of your trillions of citizens, the subspace relays, the starship drives, the noise floor is too high. You cannot hear the whispers when everyone is shouting." Thrax approached the console, his skepticism warring with his awe. "Whispers? You built a megastructure impossible by all known physics to listen to background static." Thorne nodded. "We found that the background static isn't random. The cosmic microwave background, the hiss of the Big Bang, it's structured. It's a carrier wave." He keyed a command, and the audio in the room changed. The low, chaotic rumble of the universe was filtered out, stripped away layer by the massive processing power of the station. The static cleared, and underneath it there was a sound, a rhythmic, oscillating tone. It was musical, complex, terrifyingly organized. It was a signal, and it was coming from outside the galaxy. "We call it the send silence because we have to catch the silence to find the message," Thorne explained. "The universe is screaming high adjudicator, but it's not a scream of chaos. It's a warning beacon. This structure, this ring, it's a giant ear, and we have been recording for 3 years." The alien delegates were frozen. The implications were shattering. The Synod had spent millennia arguing over trade routes and border disputes, believing they were the masters of their domain. Meanwhile, the humans, the disregarded newcomers, had gone to the edge of the world to listen to the dark. What does it say?" Xylo asked, his tank bubbling with agitation. Thorne looked out into the void, his eyes reflecting the artificial star. "It's a countdown." The revelation hung in the air, heavier than the gravity of a neutron star. A countdown. The word implied intent. It implied an end. Thrax felt a cold dread seep into his carapace. "A countdown to what?" he whispered. Thorne turned to the alien delegation. "To the return, the signal matches the energetic signature of the precursors, the ones you worship, the ones you say ascended." Thorne paused, letting the weight of his words settle. They didn't ascend Thrax, they fled. They built the first great filters to hide, and now whatever they were running from, it's found us. The holographic display shifted, showing a map of the local galactic cluster. At the very edge, beyond the range of Synod sensors, a shadow was moving. It was not a fleet. It was a dampening field, an absence of light that was swallowing stars. The Send silence isn't just a listening post, Thorn continued, his voice hardening, losing its melancholy and gaining the steel of a commander. It's a shield generator. We figured out how to harvest the entropy shear because we need to weaponize it. We need to create a firebreak in reality. Thrax stared at the human. He looked at the small, soft creature and suddenly saw the monster within. The humans had not just built a habitat, they had built a fortress against the apocalypse. They had seen the end coming, and instead of panicking, instead of seeking permission, they had quietly, methodically, and impossibly built a wall. The arrogance Thrax had perceived earlier now looked like something else entirely, a terrifying, pragmatic duty. The humans were not dreamers. They were the sentinels that the Synod had been too deaf to need. You intend to fight, Thrax said, the realization dawning on him. You intend to fight the dark. Thorn smiled, a grim, humorless expression. We are humans, high adjudicator. We don't know how to do anything else. When the winter comes, we don't die. We build a fire. And this, he gestured to the massive, glowing ring around them, humming with the power of a captured singularity. This is the biggest fire we could build. The diplomatic deadlock broke not with arguments, but with the undeniable reality of the data. The alien scientists, once skeptical, now swarmed the consoles, their minds racing to comprehend the physics the humans had unlocked. The impossible materials were alloys forged in the event horizons of microsingularities. The structural integrity was maintained by active reality anchors that stitched space-time together as it tried to tear apart. It was madness, but it was a madness that worked. The Synod delegates, so used to the slow, bureaucratic pace of their empire, were swept up in the urgent, frantic energy of the human mission. There was no time for committees. There was no time for votes. The shadow on the edge of the map was growing. Days turned into weeks on the station. The Daedalus ferried more supplies, more data. The Synod fleets were hailed not to attack, but to witness. The great reveal had shifted from a diplomatic embarrassment to a council of war. Thrax found himself standing side by side with Thorn, watching the telemetry of the approaching shadow. The old animosities, the prejudices about biology and culture, evaporated in the face of the existential threat. The humans had a unique quality, Thrax realized. It was not strength nor intelligence, but a boundless, insane adaptability. They could look at the impossible and see a challenge. They could look at the end of the world and see an engineering problem. Climax of their visit came when the shadow finally brushed against the outer sensors of the Send silence. The station shuddered, the reality anchors screaming as they fought the intrusion. The lights flickered, casting the control room into momentary darkness, illuminated only by the red strobe of alarms. Impact in Sector 4, a technician shouted. The shear forces are spiking to 400%. Thorn did not flinch. Divert power from the habitation ring. Feed the singularity. Hold the line. Thrax watched as the humans worked. They were calm, terrifyingly calm. In the face of a force that was unmaking the universe, they were typing commands, adjusting energetic flows, rerouting. G-conduits, they were not praying, they were working. High adjudicator, Thorn said, his voice cutting through the din. We need the Synod's energy grid codes. We need to link the station to your gate network. We can't hold this alone. We need to draw power from the galactic core. It was a violation of every security protocol in the hegemony. To give a primitive species access to the gate network was treason. It would give them the ability to move fleets anywhere, to drain the power of the capital worlds. Thrax looked at the screen, at the creeping darkness that was devouring the stars behind the station. He looked at Thorn. He saw no deception, only the weary determination of a soldier holding the door. Thrax reached into his carapace and pulled out his command key. Do it, he rumbled. Link the network. The Synod stands with you. The moment the connection was made, the station flared with blinding light. The energy of a billion stars, channeled through the Synod's gate network, poured into the human ring. The structure groaned, the metal singing with the strain. The singularity at the core expanded, turning from white to a deep violet purple. A beam of pure, concentrated order, a lance of stable reality shot out from the station, piercing the encroaching shadow. It was a lighthouse beam cutting through the fog of war. The shadow recoiled. The entropy shear reversed. For a moment, the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath, and then the shadow broke. It did not disappear, but it shattered, its momentum halted, its form dispersing into manageable storms of dark matter. The station had held. The fire had burned bright enough to push back the winter. Silence returned to the control room. The alarm ceased. The hum of the reactor settled back to a steady rhythm. Humans and aliens alike slumped over their consoles, exhausted, trembling. Thrax looked at his hands. He was shaking. He had never felt so alive, nor so terrified. He looked at Thorn, who was leaning against the central railing, wiping sweat from his brow. The human looked small again, fragile, but Thrax knew better now. "You saved us," Thrax said, the words tasting strange in his mouth. "You saved us all." Thorn shook his head slowly. "We bought time, High Adjudicator, just time. That was the Vanguard. The main body is still out there in the dark." He turned to face the alien council, his expression grim but resolute. "But now you know it can be fought. You know the impossible is just an equation you haven't solved yet." The aftermath of the Send Silence incident changed the galaxy forever. The writ of prohibition was burned. The immutable laws of engineering were rewritten with human annotations. The Synod was reorganized, no longer a body of stagnation, but a council of defense. Humans were granted a seat, not at the foot of the table, but at the head of the science directorate. They were the builders, the watchers, the ones who stood in the cold. But the true shift was philosophical. The elder races had spent eons believing they had reached the pinnacle of evolution, that they had mapped the boundaries of the possible. The humans had taught them that the map was wrong. They taught them that safety was an illusion, and that the only way to survive the dark was to build your own light. In the cycles that followed, the Ring of the Send Silence became the busiest port in the galaxy. Great fleets of mixed design, Synod cruisers with human engines, human destroyers with Xylanth shielding, gathered there preparing for the long war. The atmosphere was no longer one of fear, but of industry. The vast, empty silence of the void was filled with the clamor of construction, of drill and laser and welding torch. The humans had proved them wrong, yes. But more importantly, they had given them hope. Thrax often returned to the station, standing in the observation spire looking out at the darkness. He found comfort in the presence of the humans. He watched them work, watched them argue and laugh and build. He realized that the humans were not contrary to the laws of the universe. They were the universe's immune system. When the entropy came, when the silence tried to claim the galaxy, the universe produced humans to scream back. And as long as that ring held, as long as the fire burned in the deep dark, the galaxy would not go quietly into the night. They had built the impossible, and in doing so, they had forged a future that no one had dared to imagine. The silence had been Send, caught in a net of human will, and what they had pulled up from the depths was a destiny that belonged to them all. Deep in the station's core, beneath the Celebration and the Alliance, Thorn sat alone in a small room, listening to the feed from the deep-range sensors. The signal had changed. The countdown had stopped. Now it was a new pattern. He adjusted the filters, isolating the sound. It wasn't a threat anymore, it was a question. "Are you still there?" The void seemed to ask. Thorn keyed the microphone, transmitting a pulse of data back into the infinite black, a message coded in the universal language of mathematics and defiance. "We are here," he sent, "and we are not moving." The story of the galaxy was no longer a tragedy of inevitable decline. It was an epic of survival, and it had begun with a simple refusal to accept the word no. The humans had proved them wrong, and in the silence of the void, their answer rang louder than any star. The great work had only just begun. The unity was forged not in the halls of diplomacy, but in the shadow of the abyss, bound by the iron will of the species that refused to die. The Send Silence was no longer a void. It was a front line, and the line held.